This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight doesn't need much of an introduction for most of you, Garland Nixon. Garland, welcome to the show. Good to have you again.
Thanks a lot, Regis. Great to be on. Certainly appreciate you giving me the opportunity to run my mouth for a few minutes again. You know how I love to run my mouth.
Well, I always enjoy it, Garland. I would like to ask you, being in the United States right now, it's in the news all over the world. I'm in Russia, in Crimea, and it's all over the news here. The university protests that have been spreading not only across the United States, but in Canada and other countries. I'd like your take on these protests, and I'd like your take on the police violence, putting them down, that we're seeing in several places around the country. So what are your thoughts on these protests and the violence that the establishment is coming down with?
Well, there's a lot of angles I could take on the protest. I'm going to take this one. What you have, if you look at it, is a lot of kids who, and a lot of these kids consider themselves, we're lefties in America. We're the left. We're the good guys. And they thought left meant, I support the trans LGBTQ, cultural stuff, or the other thing that they thought it meant was this, that the United States government has this big pie at the end of the year, 2 trillion, whatever the budget is. And the left, so-called left in America, was they saw themselves as the goody two-shoes people. And their job was to make sure that the poor or the whoever got a share of that pie, right? There's a pie of money. And my job in America is to make sure that the right group, the people that I feel should get like whatever the 30%, that the rich doesn't get all of it. And that was kind of a loose definition of what the left had become in America. But there was a big hole in that whole concept. And that was not understanding that that pie was baked on the theft of resources from Latin America and South America, that pie was baked with this like worldwide hegemony that oppresses other countries, mistreats other countries, steals the resources of other countries, right? So and what these kids considered themselves a part of was ignoring the foreign policy, the vicious, brutal thievery of the U.S. foreign policy, and to just pretend like the money that we got at home that we're dividing amongst each other somehow magically appeared, right? So they could go forward and they could work on, trans issues, and they could work on, whatever they thought what they were working on, and try to get some money for the homeless, whatever. Never, ever having to come to face with the reality of U.S. foreign policy, which people outside of the country know, outside of the U.S., particularly in the global majority, know very, very well. And that including the Russians. They know the history of it. The Chinese, they know the history of it. When this, action started in Gaza, the reality of U.S. foreign policy and the violence and brutality of it was forced upon them. They couldn't ignore it anymore. It was right in front of their face. And they thought, well, you know what? We're college kids and we protest. When Trump got elected, they all put on their pink hats and we were told to go out and protest against Trump. So we protested against Trump. We exercised our rights. Hooray. When the George Floyd protests came, right, they all went out and they protested, and the system said, yeah, go ahead and protest that. Yeah, well, and the system eventually took protests that started organically and usurped and took over those protests and directed them till they became nothing, garbage ultimately, right? So they thought because the system was behind them with the George Floyd protests or the anti-Trump protests, they thought that they were privileged and the system would be okay with them protesting. When they protested the system, when they protested U.S. foreign policy, what they found out is that the system is brutal and violent. And the system basically said, look, when you go against us, When you fight City Hall fights back. See, when they were protesting against Trump, they weren't fighting City Hall. They weren't protesting against the system. They were protesting with the system. When they did the George Floyd protests, they may have started organically protesting against the system, but the system grabbed those protests. You know how they do overseas. If somebody starts protesting legitimately in Iran or China or Russia or Ukraine, it may start organically with people protesting against something legitimate. The system comes in. The U.S. empire comes in, takes those protests, turns them violent, turns them in a different way, and ends up using them nefariously to their own ends. So now they see the brutality of the system. They're forced to see how this pie is baked. And they say, we don't like it, we're going to protest. And the system demonstrates the brutality upon on them. The system says, okay, we'll beat you up the same way we'll beat up people in other countries. We literally saw snipers on the roof. A lot of people saw this at a university in either Ohio or Indiana. Now, these are kids who are out there protesting violence. Nobody hurt anybody. They were unarmed, and they put snipers on the roof. So I think it was an intimidation tactic, but additionally, that's just how brutal, the Biden administration, these neoliberals, they're brutal people. They'll be happy to shoot these students and use violence against them, anybody who comes up against them. So as really sad as it is to see the system beating down these young people, the flower of our youth, in a way, I could make an argument that it's a good thing, that people like me who have been telling these young people, you're up against a violent, brutal system who goes around the world and robs and steals, and they're trying to overthrow the government in China and Russia and everywhere else. And they just looked at me like I had an eye in the middle of my forehead. I got to go back and protest the anti-trans something or other, right? Now they're learning that what people like you and I have tried to tell them were true. And the system is teaching them lessons that we couldn't possibly teach them. And now they're understanding that they're only privileged as long as they go along with what the system wants, and they're not. And I think it's, it's a terrible thing, but it's a good lesson for these young people. And I'll add this too. I'll close on this comment. I got to add this. Are they students? Yes. But now they're also teachers. Because when the system came, locked them up, threw them out and said, okay, you're out here. And they returned and set up their tents and started all over again. And they refused to bow. They're teaching a lot of people out here who just go along with whatever they're told, that you don't have to do that. They're teaching resilience. They're teaching people to fight back. And I think that is necessary and will be necessary if you look at the brutality and the persistence of what these neoliberals are doing.
That's very good insight, Garland. I want to ask you this. You're there in the United States. What I see, whether it's photographs or video, is just massive protests day and night. And they're always saying it's about the students. Do you see a groundswell of support coming from larger demographic groups in America? I know a lot of my friends who have been lifelong activists are out there with signs. They're out there on the streets, the street corners. They're joining some of the protests on university campuses. But do you see a groundswell of a larger demographic group in America behind this movement?
Definitely. I see this thing spreading because, one of the things you have to take into account here is that this is as angry as these students are over what's happening in Gaza, there are other factors here. I do believe, if you look at what happened during COVID with the lockdowns and all of that, who were the people that took the worst beating? The young people. A lot of these are working, these gig economy jobs, driving Uber, delivering pizzas, whatever they could do, right? All that stuff was shut down. The only people that could make money during the COVID lockdowns were, people who owned Amazon and stuff like that. All the billionaires made money. These kids took a beating. These kids are up to their ears in student debts, right? So I don't think it's inconsequential that this particular demographic, the young college students, young people who have been taking such an economic beating under the neoliberal system, are angry, and basically this is the last straw, and they're now out in the street pushing back. I also believe that as the summer goes on, we'll see like a 1969 style summer of discontent, that the demands for these students will, which are, related to, a terrible, terrible genocide in Gaza. I believe that the demands will spread, that the demands will turn into economic demands too, and other things, since the system is unfair to them, specifically. And I think that their parents will have to answer some questions. Here, your kids are getting arrested and getting beat down by the system. They're going to come home, and some of the parents are, okay, well, we're the good old lefties, but we support genocide, or we support war in Ukraine. We support arming the Nazis, things of that nature. I think that what they're doing is infectious. I think people of good conscience in this country who see what's going on are unhappy with it. I think the ruling class has a crisis of legitimacy. If you, first of all, just look at the polls in the United States now. There was a very interesting recent, I think it might have been a Pew Research poll. And what it showed like the top 20% or something. And it showed like it said like trust in the media, 62%, trust in the Biden administration, 60-some%. Then it showed regular old working class people, and those numbers were like 10 or 15%. What we saw is this: why is it that the wealthier people and the ruling elite have so much more trust in the government and trust in the traditional institutions? This is easy, because the government and the traditional institutions represent their interest. They represent the interest of the ruling elite in opposition to the interest of your, regular old working class people. And I think that's spreading. I think what's spreading also is that some of these groups, that have that would be considered libertarians, would be considered socialists, would be considered various racial and economic and ideological groups who might have been at odds in the past. I think some of these groups are starting to come together and realize that they have common interests in opposition to the ruling elite, in opposition to the neoliberal authoritarians. And so I think things are spreading. I tell you what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to the Democratic Convention in August in Chicago. I think we're going to see really that blossoming of various groups, various ideologies, various races and organizations and ages all coming together to say, this neoliberal authoritarianism is unacceptable. And when I say neoliberal, there are a lot of people that think, well, you're talking about the Democrats. Nah, I'm talking about the neoliberals, Mike Johnson, these people who are pushing for more money for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, more war money, no thoughts whatsoever for the people of the United States and their needs. That's not just the Democrats. That's the majority of the Republican Party. Let me say this about the Republican Party. There are a lot of Republicans who look at what's going on and they say, look, whether it's Mike Johnson or any of these, Republicans that go along with Biden on everything, they say they're the rhinos. They're the Republicans in name only. What I say is, you're mistaken. You're the rhinos. They're the majority. They are the power of the Republican Party. They're the people that control the money. They're the people that control the levers of power in the Republican Party. So they're not the Republicans in name only. You, the people who are pushing back saying, I'm sick and tired of this, I don't agree with this, you're really the rhino. So I think the people in these parties, Democratic and Republican Party, who think there's some way to save these parties, that the party has been taken over by a small group of evil people, but the majority of the party can be saved. I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong. I think these parties are vicious and brutal. And to me, to be honest, I'm of a mind that people have to abandon the Republican Democratic Party, that we need oppositional parties, that they are so inured to the ruling elite. They're so inured to the warmongers and the imperialists that they're incorrigible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you anymore. They're two sides of the same coin. Interesting. You're waiting for Chicago. Let's hope it's not like the last time they had a convention in Chicago. Boy, that was talk about police brutality and violence. Uh, Garland, uh, it's not enough that this issue, this obscene violence that Israel has inflicted upon these innocent people in Gaza, over 30,000, mostly women and children, assassinated, bombed to bits. But just this week, Garland, as if to pour gasoline on a fire, the United States Congress voted overwhelmingly to pass this new anti-Semitism law. The vote was 320 to 91. Garland, whatever happened to the First Amendment? But, this just totally inflamed me, outraged me, that now this government has clearly come out, on the one hand, showing this violence that the system, as you said, is imposing on these movements. Now they're coming out with a law that makes it illegal to say anything anti-Semitic, and they don't even define that. Your thoughts?
Well, what they're doing, one of the things I think we're seeing here is desperation. That is, to me, a tremendous sign of desperation. They don't know what to do. To me, when I look at Congress now, they look like a drowning man who falls in the water, and he's reaching in every direction, grabbing anything he can grab to try to pull himself up and save himself. This bill is preposterous. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. They're calling it an anti-Semitism bill, but it's just you could call it an anti-Zionism bill, just a total usurpation of the First Amendment and the destruction of what is left of the privileges that we had. Certainly not rights. It's obvious they're privileges, because you can't get rid of a right on any given Tuesday. You can get rid of a privilege on any day of the week you want. So we're learning that we were led to believe that the Constitution gave us rights, when in fact the ruling elite saw themselves as granting us temporary privileges that they could revoke at any time. Those privileges were no longer beneficial to them. See, we say rights. We have rights. We can do it, and you can't take them from us. The ruling elite looked at it and said, yeah, we'll let you think that, but we grant you privileges at our grace. And if you are not acting or saying things in a way that we find appropriate or that benefits us, we will revoke your privileges, and we don't care. This whole business about anti-Semitism, if you think about how preposterous this is, if I criticize Israel or Zionism, right? Israelis policies. So technically now, 10 rabbis could get together and they could say, well, Joe Biden's a Zionist and Donald Trump's a Zionist. I hate these Zionists. I don't like Zionism. And particularly those two guys, I don't like them. And I don't like their policies. And those 10 rabbis could be charged with anti-Semitism for going after two guys who are not even Jewish. So because Biden and Trump are Zionists, if I attack them, it's verbally go after them. To some extent, you can argue that that's anti-Semitism, even though they aren't Jewish. And if I have to be Jewish, I'm the anti-Semite for attacking non-Jewish people. It's turning language inside out, and it's demonstrating that they don't really care anymore. They don't care what these rules made. They've been playing this game for a long time. Though I still recall one thing that woke me up that I remember this. It was under the Bush administration, and they passed this law called the Friendly Skies Initiative. You know what I mean? And it was like the wording of the law said we're doing something for the environment. But when you looked at the law, they just got rid of all of these laws that said these factories had to have a filter in their smokestack so they couldn't shoot out too much sulfur or other poisons and things like that, right? So in reality, they've learned to label something the opposite of what it is. We'll label this the friendly let's help women law, and the law will say we must beat up all women every day. They just learn to label things the opposite of what they are. So this anti-Semitism bill, and also let me add this, it's what the neoliberals do in the worldwide with their policies. They say we're here to help the Ukrainians. And how are you going to help the Ukrainians? We're going to get them all killed. We're there to free the Taiwanese people and to make sure that they're not dominated or mistreated by the Chinese. How are you going to do that? We're going to get them all killed. So the language that they use worldwide for helping people and doing good things for people, we're going to go help this country. How? We're going to relieve them of their coffee and their bananas, their oil and their gold. And that's how we're going to help the people. And they're not going to get any money. It's just what they do externally. One of the things I always say is the thing that these people do, watch what they do around the world. Watch what they do in other countries. When you saw Zelensky going after his political rivals, jailing his political rivals, using lawfare against his political rivals. You knew it was coming here. They come home. Now they're doing it to Trump. I'm no Trump fan, but what's happening to Trump is unjust, whether you like him or not. It is completely unjust. It is complete lawfare. They've actually, there's this article, I'll have to send it to you, that some guy wrote, and it was in The Hill. And what he was saying is this, it's unbelievable. The perfect example of this thing that we're talking about. He said that Professor Kim from USC, he said that people know that polls show that people don't trust the institutions, right? They don't trust the media. They don't trust the government. They don't trust, the traditional institutions. And that's as a result of misinformation. So what we have to do is tax people who are providing misinformation, that we have to make economic sanctions against people, Americans, whoever, who are involved in misinformation. So basically, what is he saying? We use economic sanctions around the world to beat down, to attack, to use aggression against countries that won't do what we want. We need to bring that home. We need economic sanctions against the, quote, misinformation at home. In other words, anybody who goes against the government narrative, that's what he means. So what we're seeing is oppressive laws to revoke the privileges that we have in the Constitution and simply to stop hiding it, to still use the corny language, but to go after anybody in the most aggressive way they can, be it violence with the students, be it changing some crazy language to make going against the government narrative is now, or going against the Israeli narrative is now anti-Semitism, or as Professor Kim said, we need to use economic sanctions against, quote, misinformation, meaning those who, debunk the government narrative.
Yeah. Talking about changing language, the meaning of words and phrases. Here's one. The system, the establishment, is referring to what's happening in the Middle East, the retaliation of Hamas, the PLO, the Houthis, Iran, Syria, Lebanon. The establishment has labeled them terrorists. But now others have labeled them the resistance in the Middle East. Now, everybody's been talking about this obscene violence of Israel on the Palestinians. And many of us have been saying since late in October anyway, where's the rest of the Muslim and Arab world coming to the support of these Palestinians? Garland, I want your opinion on the resistance, the groups that I just mentioned, who are and have banded together. Do you think they can be successful?
Yeah, I think they're being very, very successful for a number of reasons. But so let me hit on a couple of things here. When you talk about the Arab world and what they're doing, again, just like the United States, you have to divide the ruling elite from the masses. The people on the street in the Arab world are restive. They're angry, they're furious, they're ready to act. However, unfortunately, in many, many cases, their leadership is compromised. I mean, look at Jordan, as a matter of fact. The people in Jordan are in the street screaming, but the king of Jordan is half British, right? The king of Jordan is a guy who, is he's not representing the people of Jordan. So if you go throughout the Middle East and a lot of Arab countries, you will find that the leadership is compromised, highly compromised by the West. And so the people of the Arab world all of them would like to be like Yemen. All of them would like their governments to act in the way that the government of Yemen is acting, the government of Iran and Syria, etc., those resistance forces. So that's the important thing. They're making it very difficult. This whole situation is making it very difficult for the Arab leaders. A lot of them are probably afraid their governments could get overthrown, legitimately afraid that their power is in jeopardy. And it's legitimate. Their power is in jeopardy. Look at what happens in Turkey. Erdogan is taking some serious political heat, and he's had to make some U-turns due to the fact that the people of Turkey, their position on the Gaza situation was not aligned with their government. Their government, don't get me wrong, Erdogan had great rhetoric, but when you looked below the surface, he was still involved in economic cooperation with the Israelis, and the people of Turkey were not happy with it. So I think that the people of the Arab world are pushing even the leaders who are, uncomfortably aligned with the Western imperialists. They're pushing them in a direction and making it more and more difficult for them to continue working on behalf of the U.S. government. I think also, will they win? I got a book here that's a very good book that I read. You might be familiar with it, and it's called People's War, People's Army. I love to read, right? The Viet Cong Insurrection Manual for Underdeveloped Countries, right? One of the things that book discusses, it's General Diop. He's the general that defeated the French and ran them out of Vietnam. I think it's a good book for people to read, because you understand, he makes it very clear that they weren't just a bunch of barefooted people in sandals that ran into the machine gun nest. They try to pretend in the West like, oh, they're almost like animals, and they just all came flying towards the U.S. machine gun nest, and it was too many of them, and that's why the U.S. lost. They just threw bodies. You learn that they were brilliant military strategists, and that they used their military strategy and their philosophies, that they military philosophies and political philosophies, they brought them all together to defeat a more powerful enemy. And he talks in there, he explains how you defeat a more powerful enemy. And he also explains that the reason you're going to win is because you're in the right. The reason that you can defeat them is because you have a righteous cause, right? And so they bring everything together, their politics, their industry, understanding that we've got to deliver for the people in our region to keep them happy so they'll continue to support the war. If you look at what's happening in Russia right now, it's that concept, the concept that, number one, the government has to deliver for the people in order for the people to continue to support the government, so they can fight imperialism, so they can fight, these powerful hegemonic forces. Okay, the resistance forces in the Middle East region, West Asia, I like to call it, in the West Asian region, have a righteous cause, and the world can see that their cause is righteous, and they have moral and philosophical support from everyone around the world. And they have a good plan. I believe that those people either read these kinds of books, because you're talking about people in Iran, people see the people in Iran, brilliant people with a very old civilization and a history of very, very wise people. And you see that they're not just out here throwing rocks at tanks. They have a very, very sophisticated strategy, and that they are outsmarting the Israelis. They're outsmarting the U.S. at every single corner. They're reaching out and punching when they should. They're backing off. At times, people are like, why don't they punch harder? They understand they have a powerful enemy, and you don't just want to line up and go toe to toe with a powerful enemy. You'll lose. You have to out-strategize your enemy. So do I think they'll win? Yes. The other part of it is this: they understand that they've got more time. that because they have a righteous cause, they can continue to fight over time, and that time is one of their great weapons. That's what the Russians are doing. They understand that time is one of their weapons. They're in no rush. They don't have to go overrun Ukraine. They can take their time. And I think that's what the resistance forces in the Middle East or West Asia are doing. And I think they also understand that as this goes on, and as it becomes more obvious that their cause is righteous and the cause of the neoliberals, the cause of the imperialists is evil, that the ranks of their support around the world will grow, such as these students, and the ranks of support around the world are growing. So I think they're wise, sophisticated strategists. They're not just fighting blindly against an enemy. I think the Iranians and their allies are far more wise and far more moral, and they are moral and righteous in their cause. Their enemies are not. Yes, I believe that they will win in the same way that I believe that Russia will be successful in Ukraine for similar reasons.
I absolutely agree with you. They do believe that they have a righteous cause. It's been the same thing in Afghanistan. We call the Taliban terrorists, but you know what? 20 years, the Americans couldn't defeat this little band of mujahideen. And we see it almost everywhere where the hegemon has come down upon indigenous peoples. They've been terribly massacred, persecuted for decades, but they believe that they have a righteous cause. They believe in their people. They believe in their sovereignty. They believe in their culture. They believe in their civilizations. All of these things you've mentioned, I agree, that are being now felt around the world. I think the reason that people are outraged is because they realize that what Israel is doing is not righteous. They don't have a righteous cause, but these unarmed people do. And Garland, when it's debated whether October 7th was a false flag or not, it's hard to believe that Israel wasn't fully prepared. But I have to tell you this.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah,
I have a comment
absolutely.
on that. Let me comment on that. This is how I feel about it. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. I think that the West arguing and people arguing that it's a false flag disrespects the ability of Hamas, of the resistance, and gives greater power to the West than they deserve. If you look at what happened, right? Let's face it. Israel was portrayed as this powerful military, right? With unbelievable intelligence and surveillance powers, and they're so brilliant, and they couldn't possibly lose. They got these people under control. In 2006, they went up against Hamas, and Hamas was far less powerful than it is now. 30,000 Israelis versus like 3,000 Hamas fighters, and they got their butts fought to a standstill. They lost tremendous. They had to back up out of there. The Hamas didn't win. Well, Hamas did win. If 3,000 people fight 30,000 people toe to toe, and those 30,000 people have to withdraw, the 3,000 won. And they weren't nearly as powerful. They weren't, a scintilla as powerful as they are now. Okay. Hamas, I think, executed a brilliant political strategy. And that brilliant political strategy overwhelmed and overcame the technological advantages of the West, right? One of the things I'm going to compare it to is this. In the West, historically, there's a trope about Russian military. And it's like this. Well, the Russians can't really fight. It's just cold. And so you go up into Russia where it's cold, and they can take the cold better, so you lose. Right. So Napoleon lost because of the cold. Hitler lost because of the cold. Everybody lost because of the cold. What they don't want to admit is the Russians, if you push the Russians into a corner, they're great warriors and great fighters. That the Russians have great military technology, brilliant military leadership, and they utilize their brilliant military strategists and their great warriors who will fight to defend their land to defeat their enemy. It wasn't the cold. This is not the first war that's ever been in the cold. Did the cold make a difference? Yes, it did. But the Russians' military strategies and their willingness to fight and defend their land is what has given them victory after victory. So I think that I'll put the two together, saying the Russians won because of the cold discounts the Russians' ability, knowledge, military strategic advantages, and even now technological advantages. When the Russians win, they're going to win, and they're going to say, "Ah, they won because it was cold or something." Even if they win in the summertime, because they don't want to admit that the Russians have military, technical, and advantages, and that because the Russians are defending their land, they're far more powerful warriors to fight. And I think that no, Israel is not this great and great powerful military that the only way that they could have been defeated from Hamas is if they laid down and just let Hamas do this. This is so damaging to the system. I see no way the U.S. empire would let their reputation get damaged like this at exactly the same time their reputation is getting damaged in Ukraine. It would be the stupidest thing in history, and I don't think they do it. So I think that what the resistance fighters did in Palestine was they took their time, they planned brilliant military strategies, and they had fighters that were willing to give their lives for the cause, and they defeated a larger enemy because they were tougher, they were willing to sacrifice more, and because their strategy was more sound. That they defeated the Israelis. The Israelis didn't just lay down and let them come in. But now they would like us all to believe, no, we're really, really, really powerful. In fact, I think that they're happy to hear, the Israelis and the Westerners are happy to hear people say, well, perhaps they just let them come in, because then they don't have to admit that these people came in and kicked their butts.
Yeah. Good point. And they certainly did. With cunning, with incredible strategy, incredible timing, they proved that this impenetrable Israeli security system was a myth. And then just recently, when Iran fired hundreds of decoy drones and then struck with ballistic missiles. Some say hypersonic. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But they proved without a doubt that the impenetrable Israeli Iron Dome was also a myth and could be easily defeated. And people say, why didn't Iran blow up a bunch of stuff? They didn't kill anybody. And if anybody was killed, it was marginal. I think it underscores exactly what you're saying. They've underestimated and do a disservice to the resistance for everything you talked about.
One comment on the Iranians. Again, what the Iranians did was showed great wisdom, right? They showed great restraint, but they showed tremendous wisdom. It was a brilliant military display, because what they showed was, we can hit you if we want to. This is just a brushback, like in baseball, when some guy crowds the plate and he gets real close to the strike zone and a pitcher whizzes one past his head to back off the plate. Man, you better back up out of the strike zone, right? It's called a brushback pitch, just to scare you back a little bit, to let you know you could be hit if you keep crowding this plate. Okay. What they did was they demonstrated that if we wanted to, we could hurt you a lot but worse. So we don't have to. They didn't have to do anything more than they did, but they did strike some things to show we just hit a little bit. We can do a lot worse. So back up off us. They changed the dynamics the military dynamics, but not just in West Asia, in the world. They changed the military dynamics in the world. They demonstrated to everyone out there, the United States isn't tough as you think they are. They got you scared, but they're not all that tough. And they also demonstrated to the United States, look, if we want to, all of your bases can go too. All of your ships. You think that we can't send 500 drones towards an aircraft carrier group and overwhelm the air defenses of the aircraft carrier group and then fire anti-ship missiles? What are you going to do then? You may be able to stop the anti-ship missiles, but if we send in 500 drones, if you don't target the drones, they're going to hit you and do extreme damage. If you do target the drones, the missiles are going to come in and sink you. So they sent the message to the U.S. that the traditional U.S. military tactics and methods are obsolete. And I think it was a absolute brilliant strategy by them.
Yeah.
One other thing, we use David Sling and Iron Dome, pretending that ain't just the U.S. David Sling is a Patriot missile system. That's all it is, a Patriot missile system. So they take the same anti-aircraft weapons that the U.S. uses with different names. They stick them all together with one computer network, and they call it, that's the Iron Dome system, the Patriot. These names sound great. These are what happened was this: regular old U.S. anti-aircraft systems were shown to be inconsequential to those who really want to take out a target that's defended by the U.S. Systems.
Good point. And certainly military doctrine and strategy has changed around the world. Couldn't be more obvious. Now, let's talk about Yemen, the Houthis. They have been bombarded by the United States, by who it is, UAE, United Arab Republic, or whoever it is. They've just been shelled constantly. They have caused more economic harm to Israel, perhaps, than than anything else. They've stopped the ships. They've closed down half of the major port in Israel, and they continue to do it defiantly, telling the United States, you can't do anything to stop us. Again, the belief in the righteous cause. Tell me what you think about the Houthis and how and why they've been successful.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I got to add this too. The Houthis have changed the concept of warfare. The Houthis, Ansar Allah, as it were, one of the incidents that happened that wasn't widely publicized, but if you look around, you can find on it. The U.S. had a naval battle with the Houthis, which is interesting because they don't, Ansar Allah, because they don't have a navy, right? And the U.S. lost a naval battle to a country that doesn't have a navy. What happened was the U.S. decided the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which is a narrow area that comes into the Red Sea. You have to go through there, and then off you go up to the Suez Canal, and or over to Israel. Okay, the Yemen said you can't come in there. The U.S. said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to send a bunch of U.S. military ships. We're going to bring some cargo ships, and our military ships are going to guard them, and we're going to go right through that, and we're going to show Ansar Allah that even though they said we can't, we're going to bring these ships through. So they start coming through. They got a couple of cargo ships. They got some U.S. military ships. Okay, go ahead, Yemen, fire away. So the Yemen starts firing missiles and drones. They start firing back and forth. The U.S. had to turn around and go back. They couldn't go through. They were overwhelmed. So the Yemen demonstrated, the U.S. tried to show we can use our force and power, even though you say you're going to close this area down, we can break through it and bust through it, and you can't stop us. But they were wrong. They lost. They had to turn back. They found out this. This is really critical because the U.S. is a naval, world power, right? It has all of these subs with the idea being this. No matter what, whether we attack your country or not, we can shut down, use our subs and use our worldwide naval power to shut down choke points around the world of international trade. So we can say to China, well, we may not be able to, if we fight you right here, what we'll do is we'll close down these choke points around the world so that your ships can't go through, and we'll hurt you that way. What Yemen demonstrated is this: if you can't stop Yemen in the Red Sea, then you certainly have no chance against Iran in the Straits of Hormuz. And that's where Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, all of these countries, Qatar, all of their gas and oil have to go through the Straits of Hormuz. So that gets shut down. Like 30% of the world's oil goes through there. That's it for the U.S. economy. What has been demonstrated in this conflict is that the U.S. doesn't control the world's oceans and the world's seas, that some of the most important choke points in the world can be controlled by other forces. Right now, if the U.S. said, okay, we're going after China, and they said, we're going to close down these choke points that China uses up near Malaysia or Indonesia, wherever, to get their stuff out of the South China Sea, etc., China's allies in Yemen, in Iran could say, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to close down your choke points. We're going to close down the Red Sea, closed, not some, only Russia and China or whoever our allies, nobody else can go through. And the same for the Straits of Hormuz. So if you're going to try to choke out China, we'll choke out yours. China has allies. I call it like an international resistance against U.S. hegemony, in the same way that there's a local resistance in West Asia against U.S. imperialism. There's an international resistance, which includes Russia and China and Iran, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, countries in Latin America, Bolivia, etc. There's an international resistance that can work together. So what Yemen has done is they have demonstrated that something that's been going on for centuries, right? Remember Britannia ruling the high seas, the Spanish Armada, the Spanish Empire. It was get all of these ships, control the seas, the international choke points, and you are an empire of note controlling the world. Yemen has changed that dynamic now, totally changed that dynamic. And again, they have a righteous cause. They're well armed. They have good, strong allies. And they're very effective because they work as an alliance. The other thing to remember, when Iran demonstrated their power against Israel, the Iraqi resistance fired missiles, Yemen fired missiles, Hezbollah fired missiles. Everybody that night sent the message. In the morning, before Iran launched that operation, they seized the ship in the Straits of Hormuz to demonstrate as a whole, if we were to go toe-to-toe with you, U.S. and Israel, we would shut down the Straits of Hormuz, and all of our allies could hit you and your bases at the same time. It was a demonstration that they had a network, an alliance that is far too powerful. That's what Yemen shows. Yemen, if they were just by themselves, that's one thing, but they're the tip of the spear, right now of this alliance. I think Russia and China have also learned that. I think that's why they're helping in arming North Korea. I think Russia and China have learned from Iran the power of an alliance, that you have to have an alliance to resist a hegemonic force as powerful and brutal as the U.S. empire.
Great analysis, Garland. I want to take us back to what you've been referring to, Ukraine and the hegemon. Joe Biden recently sent a number of 6, I think, ATACMS, ATACMS, long-range missiles to Ukraine. By the way, just last night, the Russian military defense shot down all 4 of these ATACMS over Crimea. What do you think this means to this conflict, that the United States keeps upping the ante, escalating the crisis, while Russia keeps telling them, be careful. In fact, Russia says you have crossed the line. But if you attack the bridge again, if you attack Sevastopol and do serious damage, we will deliver a devastating blow on you. Garland, what do you think the Russians mean?
I don't know. There are a number of things they could mean. One of the things I found with Iran and with the U.S. is the U.S. thinks that everybody thinks like them, right? So when Russia says, "Well, deliver a devastating blow," they think it's kinetic. Oh, Russia's going to fire a missile and blow up the NATO headquarters or something like that. What we see with the Russian leadership, with the Iranian leadership, with the Chinese leadership is they have people like Sergei Lavrov, right? These people are intellectuals. They're deep philosophical intellectuals. They see the big picture and they understand something. The U.S. is very, very comfortable with brutality and brute force and things like that. So I think the Russians will always outthink them. I think it could be, they could do something. They could shut down, maybe just say once and for all, here's what we're going to do. We're going to shut down everything in Ukraine. You guys, your water systems will be flattened. Your electrical systems will be flattened. All of that stuff will be flattened, and we'll see how you can deal with that. That's one option. I think the Russians could say, you know what, we're going to stop pumping oil for a month. We're going to shut down our oil going to the West for a month. We'll keep China and India. We'll keep our allies flush with oil. But as far as the West, we're going to shut down. We'll stop 1 million barrels every couple of days and drive the price through the roof. They have some options that they can use economically to hit the West. So I think they have a variety of options. The West only thinks of kinetic warfare, but I think the Russians, the Chinese, etc., understand they have various options. So they may act in a way that none of us had ever suspected. Like, man, I never thought about that. That's pretty interesting that now they've said we're not delivering you any any uranium, and you need it, and you got nuclear. So they got options that they could use. They got lots of cards they could play, and I don't think we could guess which one they would play. But I don't think it's going to be anything stupid or just, go start, swinging madly in all directions. I think it'll be very, very focused and well thought out, however they would act. I also say this in a paradoxical kind of way. One of the great things that's happening for Russia is that the U.S. is throwing all of the technology, all of these wonder weapons, everything they can at Russia, troops from all over NATO, or in a way, the Russians get mad, or people get mad. Doggone it, why are they sending more NATO troops and more weapons? When it's all over, basically the Russians will be sitting there like, you sent the French, you sent the Spanish, there was Americans, there was Canadians, there was all these mercenaries. You used all the best weapons that you had, ATACMS, whatever, Merkava tanks, you sent it all, and we stomped it all into the ground and sent you home. Next. It's like the worst thing to do is like there's a person there and you say, I'll fight you. And it's okay. And you say, and I'm going to bring my 2 buddies. And the guy says, bring them. And we're all going to have baseball bats. Sure. And we'll have knives. Okay. You can have knives too. All right. Now we're going to take you. And you and your 3 buddies jump on him with baseballs, bats, and knives. And he kicks all of your butts and sends you all home. How humiliating is that? In the course of the fight, it looked tough. It looked unfair. Oh, man, that's unfair, man. There's 3-on-1 and you guys got weapons. But in the end, he kicked all your butts and sent you home. It looks far worse. If one guy had fought the other guy and lost, okay. You just turned this man into Superman. They are turning Russia into Superman, into superheroes. The world is going to be sitting back afterwards, looking at saying, holy crap. The West, the entire Europe and the United States threw everything they had at Russia. Russia kicked their butts and sent them home and said, next, you got anything else? F-16s, bring them up to the next. We'll shoot those down too. Whatever, you F-35, send them. Whatever you got, you send it to Ukraine. We'll blow the hell out of it and we'll send it back to you as a pile of trash. During the course of the battle, it looks like, oh my God, now there's ATACMS missiles, now there's this, that. But when it's all over and said and done, the Russians are going to be sitting there with their arms folded saying, that's all you got? Okay, thanks. Call if you want to fight us again, call us again. We prefer not to do this, but we'll do what we got to do. they are turning Russia into basically a superheroes that defeated the entire West with ease. That's the way it looks to me.
Thanks for saying that. I would like to have said it myself. You did make a very good point early on in that comment. I think a lot of people have been expecting Russia to blow up stuff in retaliation for the continuous escalation of the United States. And I say it's the United States. This is not a proxy war. This is a direct hot war. When you spend over $150 billion on this war, you are a direct participant. When you send in all this, the best technology you have, this is a hot war. And I think you made a great point. I believe this myself. Russia has many arrows that they can shoot. Economic is one. And how economically, you mentioned it. They can stop sending gas to Europe. Yes, to Europe. There is still gas getting to Europe. There is still gas getting to the United States. There is uranium that's still going to the United States, which they desperately need. There's aluminum, there's steel, there's everything that America doesn't have that Russia could say, just like you said, whoops, you know what? Here's our devastating blow. Boom, we're going to cut you off. I really do think, and I've said this many, many times as well, and you mentioned it, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians have a very long time view of history, of everything. They do not act impulsively. They will not react to an escalation, for example. They will allow the enemy to show what they have, to weaken themselves, to defeat themselves. And I loved it. And then Russia will sit back, and so will Iran, so will the rest of those countries we call the resistance, and they'll just say, we told you so. I think that was a terrific, I wish I could have said it myself, because that's exactly how I feel, Garland. You said it with a lot.
Can I add something else?
Yeah.
And one way you could look at it is escalation. There's a different way to look at it, as a provocation, right? Here's what I mean. You know, a person is losing a fight and they get desperate and they try something else. They try to provoke you to do something different because the methods, the tactics that you're using are so successful, they become desperate. So they try to provoke you to change your tactics. But if you're wise, you'll stick with the tactics that are working. I think that's what has happened with Russia. That Russia, they're fighting. This is the way we fight. This is our style. This is what we do. We're going to slowly do it. We're going to chip away at your foundation. Then your whole house will fall, right? And then we'll move and we're not going to do anything stupid. Okay. So Russia is doing what they're doing and it's working. And the U.S. basically says, man, this is working. We got to do something to change them. We got to provoke them. Maybe they'll do something stupid. So they do a provocation and people are like, ooh, what are the Russians going to do now? And the Russians are like, we don't respond to provocations. What we're doing is working. You know, I'm very much into boating, right? There's a term in boating, maintain course and speed. I'm looking at that buoy. I have a chart. I have a compass. I have set a course for that buoy. Now, fog may come and I can't see the buoy now. All these things may happen. I got a course. I'm trusting that course. I'm going to maintain course and speed. I'm laying on that compass point, right? You can provoke me. All these things can happen, but I got a plan and that plan is going to get me to where I need to be. Okay. I think the Russians have a plan. This is what we're going to do. This is how we fought. This is how we defeated Hitler. This is how we defeated everybody that we've defeated. Now, they've had to make some adjustments. There's drone warfare. There's different kinds of missiles. Sure. But the foundational strategies that they use for fighting are the same, right? And they're working. As these provocations come, I see them as an attempt to get Russia angry. So they'll react emotionally. Well, we'll fix you. We'll do this. And that takes them away from their strategy. Oh, we'll act in a way that's outrageous. We'll blow something up in Poland. And then the US can say, aha, they've attacked us and now things are different, right? I think the Russians understand this. I think they understand, you know, if you learn self-defense, and of course, Vladimir Putin is a black belt. He's a martial artist. One of the things you have to get trained is how to take a punch. There's no fight in the world where you're not going to get hit. In those karate movies, no, you're not going to get hit. You're going to block every punch. In reality, you're going to take some punches. In fact, even if you learn when you're training how to defend yourself against edge weapons, there are times when they say, look, you might get cut. But you want to get cut here or here. You don't want them to hit a vital. So you'd rather block it and take a cut on your hand or somewhere like this than take a in the main part of your body where your organs are. You have to make a decision. So I think the Russians, Vladimir Putin being an martial artist, understands, look, it's a war. It's a fight. I've learned how to, the Russians, we taken punches before. We took a punch of 30 million people in World War II. We know how to take a punch, but a punch is not going to make us change our strategy. We're going to take that punch. We're going to take it. We're going to recover from it. We're going to keep fighting. And so I think that's basically what's happening. Escalations, let's call them provocations, to try to get Russia to veer away from a strategy that is effective, that will take them to victory. They're not going to work. Same with Iran. People are like, oh, Iran's going to do this now. Israel's done that. Iran's like, nah, we're far too smart for that. We don't respond to provocations. We act based on our own impetus. We act based on when we decide this is what we want to hit. This is how we're going to do it. Here's our plan. Let's do it. You can do a provocations. That's not going to make us act because that's not part of our plan. That's your provocation. We can take a punch every now and then, but we're still going to do what we need to do. And so that's why I think it's important to understand that the Russians, even if the Russian people might get pissed at times, oh boy, why won't our leadership? Why Zelensky just blew up something in Volgograd? Our leadership needs to re-hit him. The leadership of Russia is saying, we don't like it when they hit Belgorod or whatever, but we're winning. And we're going to keep doing this until we get victory. And then they ain't going to be able to hit nothing. This game's going to be over. So that's what I think.